Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Iowa Workforce Developments and the Iowa Department of Education's latest webinar series focusing on work-based learning. My name is Joe Murphy. I'm the president of the Iowa Business Council. And for this afternoon's program, we're delighted to share the Iowa Business Council's top 4 list of professional competencies that we've researched over the course of the last 4 or 5 months or so. And so we're very excited to share with you some of the research and insights that we've learned from our membership, and then also bring together some excellent thought leaders, both in the education space and the business space as well, in a panel discussion, taking a more deeper dive into the different approaches between schools and businesses on how they approach soft skills and why a gap persists throughout the state in different areas. From there, we'll go into resources to consider presentation featuring Joe Collins of the Department of Education, where he will provide some really important tools and tactics for participants today to be educated on how they can continue to take information learned from today and apply it into their business or their classroom as well. And then, of course, we'll finish up with some question and answer and a conclusion by Kathy Leggett, the Business Engagement Liaison with the Iowa Workforce Development Office. And so with that, let's move forward and talk about some of our research from the Iowa Business Council. If we could move forward, Abby. So the Iowa Business Council, maybe just to level set, is a business association representing some of the largest companies in the state of Iowa. All told, we have about 160,000 employees employed in the state of Iowa. So while we only have about 22 total members, we do represent a very sizable chunk of the total employment here in the state of Iowa. And so this summer, we wanted to get a better understanding of the current and future workforce needs from the Iowa Business Council members to be in a better position to assist, offer solutions, and identify themes to develop a strong and talented and available pipeline here in the state of Iowa. Additionally, while workforce remains the top concern among our members, that level of concern has dropped over the course of the last 8 to 12 months. And I think part of the reasoning for that is the state's softening labor market. We're seeing declining total employment month over month, and we're also seeing a decline in Iowa's labor force participation rate, which means that we really have to make sure that our existing workforce is really primed to perform well and to perform quickly in today's job environment. Next slide, please, Abby. So we embarked on a study this summer where we met with Iowa Business Council's talent development and HR teams. And we went into this admittedly sort of naively thinking that we would hear a lot of, we need more welders, we need coders, we need people in cybersecurity or AI. But as often as it happens with research, the answer to some of these questions were not something that we anticipated. We really quite decisively found that there were themes around professional skills or soft skills that were quickly identified across the entire membership of the Iowa Business Council. And so that really got us thinking about how can we put together a process in which to help not only Iowa Business Council members, but businesses and school administrators and educators across the state. Next slide, please. So when we gathered all of our information, quickly it became apparent that there were 4 distinct themes that were coming into our perspective. And we'll go through each of these individually, but the top 4 buckets are communication and social engagement, organizational and service mindset, and resiliency and grit, followed by a tolerance for ambiguity and change. And so if we move on and talk about the communication and social engagement bucket first, if we move to the next slide, you'll see that there are a number of different things that fall into this category, but being able to clearly and professionally and directly communicate in a verbal or written form across your team and to your direct supervisors is vitally important. Employees need to be socially cognizant of appropriate ways to engage with team members, having eye contact, being able to hold and carry a conversation, and of course, avoiding inappropriate phone use in a professional setting. Become adaptive to collaborating with a wide array of stakeholders and team members in working towards a common goal. And working towards a common goal was a very key theme throughout all four buckets. If we move on to the next slide, you'll see in our next conversation around organizational and service mindset, this is really about adopting a mindset in that your efforts contribute toward the organization's and not the individual's goal, mission, or strategy. In today's individualistic society or outlook, it's really important to note that this is a key attribute for a high performer. A high performer will understand that adopting this mindset, what the common goal is, working towards that organizational mission, is a better way of leveling up and achieving individual success. If you can put your efforts into achieving the company's or the organization's goals, that will put you in line for much more individual accolades, promotions, and other praise as well. And it's, again, important to develop a long-term view and have realistic expectations of your current role. Having a variable and changing workflow, how performance today impacts your trajectory in the long term, all of these things need to be adopted into this service mindset that we think are vitally important as we think about the professional proficiencies that Iowa Business Council members identified. Moving into the next slide, we'll see that the next theme really has a lot to do with resiliency and grit. So how can you overcome an obstacle or a challenge, knowing that it might take a lot of time? You have to stay committed to the long-term goal while working through adversity and setbacks, and demonstrate a strong work ethic while showing up on time, and understand that everybody receives constructive feedback, but people need to be open and ready to receive opportunities for performance improvement. This is a learned skill, admittedly. It's difficult sometimes to hear, but the more prepared we are to receive feedback on our performance, the better able we will be at adopting that service mindset, that organizational mindset, and achieve the goals of our organization, which puts the individual in a better opportunity for personal success. Next slide, please. And the last bucket is the tolerance for ambiguity and change. You know, I think if the pandemic taught us anything, it's knowing that things change very quickly, and sometimes there's not a lot of clear direction. So how are you able to thrive in a setting where circumstances or directions are not always clear? How can you engage in problem solving, creative thinking, and understanding that the tasks assigned to you are your responsibility? If your manager or supervisor assigns you something, you have to work the problem, right? You have to become a self-starter while working towards that long-term goal and organizational goal. The other thing that I think is really important in this category from a change standpoint is leadership development. We know that leaders are developed every single day, but with the workforce situation that we're in right now, we're finding that individuals are being promoted much more quickly than they ever have before, and that leads to a change not only for that individual, but for the corporate culture as well. And that's a good thing, certainly, but it makes the importance of leadership development earlier on in a student's career or a worker's career that much more important. So being able to engage in opportunities when provided are really important. Next slide, please. So for next steps, we're really working with a wider network to distribute this information. We want to obviously partner with the IWD, Iowa Department of Education, school administrators, school boards, educators, anybody on this call. Yes, we were absolutely happy to share these slides with you, and we're happy to have follow-up conversations as well. If anybody would like a deeper dive into where we think that we can add value. You know, I think as we think about the opportunities that we have to share these experiences, to share this information will only help all of us as we try to populate Iowa's talent pipeline. And so with that, I'm pleased to move on to our panel discussion opportunity. And we're really excited to bring in a group of industry experts, both from business and education. We have Mandy Patchert from HNI Corporation in Muscatine. We have Michelle Hill, the Director of Work-Based Learning from Waukee Community School Districts, and Seth Harms from West Delaware County Community School District as well. And really, really excited to get his perspective as a small business owner as well, and what he's working through. So if we could bring the panelists together, we'll start our panel discussion portion. If every panelist, and we'll start with Seth, could maybe just give a quick introduction of yourself, and then maybe identify how you have identified a soft skill shortage, and how you think job seekers, especially young individuals, are prepared to succeed when it comes to communication and resiliency. So your introduction, and then how well you think job seekers, especially young people, are prepared to succeed when it comes to communication, resiliency, and other key attributes. Seth, we'll start with you.
All right. Well, thank you. My name's Seth Harms. I've been a welding instructor at West Delaware High School for 22 years now. I also teach concurrent enrollment through Northeast Iowa Community College. I've done that for 21. And as I said, I do have a small business. It's a pretty small business, Harms Weld Training and Inspection, where I go out with my certified welding inspector certificate and do some inspections for companies. So Joe, to get back to your question, especially young people are prepared to succeed when it comes to communication. I think, school districts are getting better. I do believe that. The days of just sitting in the classroom seat listening to an instructor speak for anywhere from 45 to 90 minutes doesn't happen as often as it used to. We do a lot of communication in the piece of Socratic seminars, along with project-based learning, where they're working as a team. And I'm not talking just welding, I'm talking school-wide. Where I see a little bit of a situation, I do believe, is that resiliency. When something happens that they're not ready for, and how do they react, or how do they respond, I guess. But I think as time goes on, hopefully we can come up with solutions, and I'll be curious to hear what the rest of the panel has to say too. But that's always one that I do struggle with, maybe myself, just a little bit.
Great. Thank you, Seth. Michelle, let's get your perspective, please.
Sure. My name is Michelle Hill. I'm the director for work-based learning for the Waukee Community School District. Been with the district 16 years, and in education and forms of business over the past 28. I lead the Waukee Aspiring Professional Experience APEX program, work-based learning opportunity, and then also our internship and our teacher practicum programs here in the district. And it's interesting. So we put APEX together with a stakeholder group, an advisory board, lots of business partners over 11 years ago. And our standards for the program are exactly almost match what the Iowa Business Council just pulled together again, 11 years later. So in all of our standards in the program, we're always looking for opportunities for students to engage in more communication, more collaboration, resilience, and the ability to persevere through things that are a little ambiguous to them, or things that they haven't done before. And so I think schools, K-12, our district especially, has a focus on things, on these types of soft skills, whether it's in our elementary Leader in Me programs and things like that. But you truly get to see the growth in students when they participate alongside our business partners. It's where they, either on projects or internships or different things, that's where they build that confidence to not go straight to their phone when they're nervous, to send a text or look something up, that they actually will shake someone's hand and have a conversation and engage in that small talk. That all of that really helps build our high school, especially students, their skills in those areas. So it's kind of interesting to see that those soft skills are still the highest demand for our business partners, even after all this time. So we will continue to work on those skills for our businesses.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Mandy, what would you add?
Yeah, hi everybody. So Mandy Parcher with H&I Corporation. We're a global manufacturer of workplace furnishings and residential building products. So hopefully the desks and chairs that you all are using in your classrooms to your students out of Muscatine, Iowa. I'm our manager of university and community relations, which in short is workforce development. So I lead our strategy around everything from K through 12 outreach, apprenticeships, internships, and our community partnerships as we think of barriers to the workforce. Been with the company 12 years, but in this role now for about 3. And I've really enjoyed these type of sessions. And I will say I continue to learn from opportunities like this because everything is changing so fast. To answer the question, I would say, the level of preparedness of students and, early career professionals today, it varies. And there's a lot of factors that go into that, whether it's their school, their home life, their experiences. But as an employer, there's a lot that we can train when it comes to the technical skills. And there's been a lot of investment of time, energy, resources into educational systems on the technical skills over the past several years. And with that, though, now we're noticing a gap in the professional skills, and those are the ones that are harder to train on. And as we've continued to push to engage younger students and bring them into the workforce and give them experience, I think we're really seeing that gap in those professional skills, because often you learn about it from experience. And these students, the earlier we engage, the less experience they have. And so where can they get that earlier? It's through the school systems. And then COVID really shook everything up too, which has highlighted a lot of these issues. But I'd say I'd highlight one additional to what the others have already spoken on, but the organizational and the service mindset has been a huge change in this most recent generation, and maybe even more so just post-COVID, but really thinking long-term, and building trust or envisioning themselves in a career beyond a couple years is really difficult for students and early career professionals to fathom and even think about. And so as we as an employer, try to accommodate just the difference in expectations that the workforce is looking for, it's made it really, really difficult. So yeah, I think the IBC has done a really nice job summarizing these from the conversations that we had this past summer. And I'm excited to continue the conversation because we've had a lot of momentum on the technical side. And now this is the opportunity to switch it to the professional side.
Well, Mandy was definitely a part of those conversations and many others as we progress down this role. And Michelle, as you mentioned, the continued focus from an education standpoint on these skills too. Comments from our members and businesses beyond the membership of the IBC have consistently told us we can train anybody to do anything, but if they have a fundamental understanding and a proficiency in these areas, they're that much more likely to succeed, be retained in the workforce, and really create opportunities for themselves and their families. Let's move on to another question. Mandy, I want to stick with you. And as a business leader looking to the next generation workforce, how would you recommend schools prepare students with soft skills, including your thoughts on the value of in-depth work-based learning, like internships, like apprenticeships that HNI continues to invest in?
Mm-hmm. Great question. I think it's one thing to teach career readiness and provide these experience. It's another, though, to provide the opportunities that result in career readiness outcomes versus just next step in career pathways or even college readiness. I've really enjoyed kind of the shift in mindset over the past few years around college is a path, but it is not the only path. And as we see schools shifting that mindset and teaching more towards outcomes and career readiness, that college readiness is part of that as well, right? College is a path to several careers, but it's not the only path. And so as we focus into those careers and career pathways, nothing changes from the college readiness. It just adds to the focus on all the other career pathways that students need to have awareness and prepare for. As I think of how schools can engage, yes, the apprenticeships, the internships, those are those value add, those deep connections that really lead towards direct job placement. The high school apprentices that we've engaged with, that's our intention for investing in the program. And that's the outcome that we're starting to see is that they have secured a job. They're earning as they're learning right out of high school. And often it's a great way to make post-secondary education affordable for so many other groups of students. Those are programs, they take time, they take investment, they're different than what we've done. And I will be the first one to acknowledge that it takes a lot of work and a lot of partnership between all of us, education, corporate, state. But there's other things that schools and individuals can do and integrate soft skills into the curriculum a little bit easier. Just group projects, letting them fail is a big one. I mean, I know failure is one of the questions we ask in every interview. Give me an example of when you failed. What did you learn? What did you overcome? What was the result? I mean, that's really getting to that resiliency piece and that problem solving piece. Being that, having problems that are more open-ended, that have multiple right answers, but they need to identify and choose the best answer, or at least weighing the pros and cons of each decision, and finding confidence in that decision is really helpful. And just really that self-directed learning. And so engaging with companies, I think, is really, really positive, even just to bring real world examples into the curriculum to teach from these type of perspectives is helpful. But I know from myself, speaking on behalf of H&I, as well as several of my other contacts within my network, we're all willing to partner and engage with the classroom in whatever way possible. We just all speak a different language, and we don't always know where to ask or where to start. And so, partners like Joe Collins, Joe Murphy, Kathy, all of you have been really great to close that gap and connect us. And so I thank everyone for participating in today's session, because that is really the first step in making this change and making this shift.
Thank you, Mandy. Seth, you have unique insight into this, both as a small business owner and as an educator. What would you add?
Yeah, so, well, and as an educator, we run a registered apprenticeship program in welding. One of the things that I guess I would say is, back to Mandy's conversation, I believe it takes an educator who is willing to go out and ask as well. There is a strong connection and a great opportunity to build a program by asking for the help from the companies, like you had said. But as for the apprenticeships, you're absolutely right. We have proven now that maybe that post-secondary path is not the way for everyone. And when an individual has a chance to obtain a certificate such as completing an apprenticeship, registered apprenticeship, that's a pretty neat piece of paper. And we have a lot of success. We've had quite a bit of success with our students sticking around our area and continuing to weld in our industries that we represent. So the apprenticeship is great. The internships are great as well. I will say, from an education standpoint, I know Mandy was talking about the business standpoint. From an education standpoint, it is also a lot of work. I'm a career explorations teacher as well with my MOC endorsement. And I just finished last term. I had to call over 30 different businesses to get students placed in areas. But if it's for the best for the students, then I guess that's what we do. So
that's right, exactly. Michelle, your perspective on this topic, on introducing soft skills into some of the work-based learning programs that Apex is running.
Sure. I mean, we definitely do it in our junior and senior work-based learning programs, where they get authentic projects from business partners. They go through the whole spectrum of learning how to communicate with a business partner to set up a client meeting, go through goals and budget lines and expectations for projects, and then deliver those on the back end. But honestly, I think it starts even earlier in our schools. And as a Waukee Community School District, they're very interested in thinking about ways to allow students to create a servant leader mindset, thinking about that they're adding value in their classrooms every day, to themselves, to their teams, to their group work, K-12. And then in addition, embracing some of that project-based learning that Mandy kind of mentioned, that would allow our younger students to have some ambiguous problems to solve, to allow their critical thinking to kick in, and then allow them to have some productive struggle through that, and be able to, build some of that confidence and questioning and all of that. It has to start a little bit earlier, I think, and the district's very focused on what type of exploration we can continue to give students even at a younger age, so that more and more students are ready for those junior and senior year internship, apprenticeship opportunities, that they've built those skills all along, and they have those proficiencies and that confidence to engage with our business community in that way. So, we're looking even younger and younger, lower than our Apex program, to support that skill building even younger.
This next question really involves, the way that business and educators communicate. And it's a quick question, and so looking for a quick answer. From a business standpoint, are businesses and schools failing to communicate enough on these topics, on soft skills and work-based learning? What's the disconnect from your vantage point? Michelle, do you want to take the first crack?
Yeah, I think Seth kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. It takes a teacher willing to make a call. Sometimes a cold call is scary, adult or student, it's scary. And when we started building the program, it took a while to build our resources and our community members to do that. So, just being willing to do that, and then making it easy for our business partners to engage back, find some efficiencies and some easy ways for businesses to kind of tiptoe into the world that is education. I think that those are the two pieces. You got to have people ready on both sides and to find ways to make it work, because we're all busy. We all have, things that we need to achieve. So yeah, both sides need to go for it.
Right. Seth, any follow-up from your previous comments on that?
Yeah, I would think the one other thing is build that relationship. I think that relationship is critical. The companies that I work with are not afraid to tell me when I'm doing something wrong, and I'm able to handle that, that criticism or feedback, constructive feedback, as I like to call it. But it's a great opportunity for me to, kind of mold and help my students be more prepared when they go. So not only do you create that, that cold call, as Michelle said, but build that relationship and have that individual, try to find those communities, or those companies rather, that are willing to step into the classroom and actually become a part of it. I think that's huge.
And Mandy, from your perspective as a business leader who has done these cold calls, what would you add to this, and maybe what advice would you give to other business participants today to get over that hurdle?
Yeah, I would say there's never enough communication. What's been really helpful is having a dedicated resource within our company. So someone like myself in this type of role, that I can build those relationships, and it is a consistent contact. Now, I might not be the one hosting the experience. I'm not the welding expert, but I know who is. And so I can make that connection. So identifying the right person within each organization is where I think we're failing, or where we are continuing to struggle. And not out of intent or desire, but it's messy. Sometimes I'm working with a teacher, sometimes I'm working with the principal, sometimes it's a counselor, sometimes it's a specific work-based learning coordinator. It's really difficult as an employer to identify who is my right contact to even start getting in the door. There's a lot of organizations that have kind of stepped in and helped provide previously defined kind of like intermediary support, connecting employers with businesses. And while that's helpful, I'd say there's also a lot of duplicative resources doing the same things. So I think where, maybe the group that isn't listed in this question are those organizations, and how are they collaborating and communicating to help connect and make these resources known and more easily accessible. But lots of work to do, but we've come a really, really long ways already.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Seth, I want to turn to you as putting or keeping your educator hat on, I guess, not that you ever take that off. Could you talk a bit more about how soft skills currently tend to be taught in the classroom, and what would you change if you could change anything? And, from a time constraint, does the time factor into this? Because you have to teach so many other things in the classroom, right? Like how does it all fit in? And is that too much of an obstacle? How do you fit this into your curriculum?
Sure. So in my curriculum, it all fits pretty well. As a welding instructor, I try to teach how a business would operate. I hold my students accountable. If they're not going to be in class that day, I expect to get a text message from a Remind app to make sure that they're letting me know they're not going to be in that day. When I look at the school as a whole, we've kind of started putting together in our college and career readiness portfolio. A student has to actually, as a senior, as a graduation requirement, now has to present to the senior class on different skills that they've learned in productivity, accountability, flexibility, adaptability, critical thinking, and so on. So I feel like we hit that pretty well. Is it too little time? It's enough. I mean, we have enough other things that we are required to do. It does make it difficult, but at the end of the day, I kind of look at high school as an opportunity to practice those on the daily basis. I get in trouble for saying this at times, but I'm going to say it anyways. In high school, I don't remember a lot of what I learned in certain classes, but I do remember how I was able to present. I was able to debate. I was able to think. And I think if we look at high school as not necessarily as much of the content that we're supposed to learn as much, and more so on the skill sets that we can learn from that content, we might see that we're getting it. I just think it's, we're just a little bit, I don't know, maybe we're not quite there yet, but
Yeah. Michelle, how do you see this fitting into the classroom? What would you change? How does this apply into some of the other things that you're working on from a soft skill, professional skill perspective?
Yeah. Group work, presentations, those are all things that kind of happen. And teachers that are able to bring in that project-based learning, like I mentioned. Sometimes, thinking about, being able to leave a voicemail for someone. Those are afterthoughts in a, traditional classroom sometimes. I think teachers are doing really creative things to bring in those soft skills. And then, we're really lucky in a program like Apex that we have the time. We have extended block for a whole semester to work on those things. And so the students that are able to work in some of those classes find ways to practice those skills. But we've had a lot of schools come to visit, and sometimes it just seems like just an enormous task to do something like we've done. I mean, we're a big district with a lot of students and a building that we're very lucky to have as well. But we tell people, you don't need all of that. You need one teacher, one engaged business partner, and this, we always say one student, but the students will follow. They love this type of work, and just find little ways to embed it, whether it's, maybe you're an English teacher and you ask the staff, like, in what ways, or business partners, what ways do you use writing in your life, in your businesses? And then, if it's a marketing teacher, have a business partner bring you in a real life project and pitch it to the students, and then work on it through all of your concepts, and then pitch it back to the business partner at the end. Just that, having that external audience for lots of things, it makes so much of a difference. I think teachers are finding creative ways to do that, but just continue to keep doing that, because it builds those soft skills right along with the content.
Yeah. Great points. I wanna switch gears and pose a question in a different way. We know that the pandemic has obviously dramatically changed the landscape and how we communicate, how we engage interpersonally, whether that's in a business setting or in an educational setting. Why are these skill sets so important to the success of an individual, not just in a business sense, but in the academic sense as well? Mandy, do you want to take the first stab at that?
Yeah, this is It's a big one. I think it depends too on the skill, as if we were to break it down, like active listening is really good for everyone, right? Students, early career, just all of us. It can really strengthen your relationship, foster collaboration, be more efficient with your communications, learning how to effectively present yourself. So just communication on camera in different forums, working with different generations. We do a lot of trainings around influence without authority. So how do you influence conversations? And a lot of that comes down to communication and connection between individuals. And so how to do that is really important. I think adapting education and experiences to the individual, recognizing that we are all different, we're all human, is one of the big things that's come out of COVID, and it's put a lot of burden, I know, on employers to try to humanize our policies and procedures that we were so used to staying within the lines on, and now we need to adjust and adapt. But that's been also one of the beauties of post-COVID. And so just challenging everyone to think about those soft skills, because we didn't have to worry about them as much when we were behind a mask, or not on screen or not in an office, and now we are. And so it makes sense that maybe we're not all as sharp and educated and up to speed on them as we were or could have been. And so just being more intentional with those efforts, I think, is really important.
Seth, what would you add to that?
I sometimes wonder if as education and as adults and as in general, we didn't hold the students back just a little bit. I think the students were much more ready to get back to the day-to-day than we were, and I think we kind of held them back just a little bit. When it comes to communication, there's parts of us that we're going to have to realize, in the technological world that these students live in, they know the computer. They know it much better than me. I ask my 14-year-old how to run my phone sometimes. So the communication side, when it comes to technology, I think they're going to be okay. Now, presenting themselves correctly, that's one thing. But I look at that in maybe a different perspective of the presenting as opposed to the technology. When it comes to communication, though, I think the focus needs to be as much on the one-on-one conversations, the written, the actual handwritten. Just as an example, I asked my students to write a thank you letter to all the businesses that they were able to represent. I could not believe that I had to teach how to write an envelope, or write an address on an envelope. So little things like that, things that I think we took for granted because we did it all the time, but they're just in an opposite. They're just in the other side of things where we ask them for help on technology. Maybe we need to remind them about the old pencil and paper. So
That's great insight. Very, very, very informative. Michelle, what would you add to this conversation on how the landscape has been changing with respect on how we communicate and engage?
Yeah, so we call these soft skills, professional skills, universal constructs, lots of terms, but they're human skills. And there's no better way to get a teenager perk up when you tell them, now the skills that you're learning here will also help you in your friendships, your college roommates, your future spouse, being able to push through some really tough conversations, make your point, but then also hear the other side and think win-win and things like that. And we have a really great partner named Kristen Economist. She comes in and talks about confident humility. And so being able to present yourself with experiences that you've had in a tactful way. But when you're an aspiring professional in the workplace, how you can bring your thoughts there, but then also remember when you're having a conversation, maybe pull that earbud out of your ear so everybody knows that you're focused on the conversation, and you put your phone away for a meeting. Maybe try putting your phone away at the lunch table and have a conversation. And it's really interesting to walk around high school lunchrooms. I mean, they're still having conversations and looking each other in the eye. But want to encourage that as well. So letting them know that building those human skills, those soft skills, they're going to help them in any situation, in any career field, even if they're not super defined on what they want to do quite yet. just having experience and building those skills is so important in anything they do, relationships, business, otherwise. So good things to learn.
Great point. Love that phrase. Confident, was it confident humility? Is that, or
Confident humility, yeah. She does a
humility?
great session on that.
That's excellent. Okay, we've talked a lot about communication and about the importance of you can't over communicate, right? You can't communicate enough. So I want to bring it back to that. What are some of the key strategies that you found to be successful in setting up that open dialogue? We've talked a lot about how important that dialogue is, but how do you establish it? What are some of those key tactics between local businesses and the educational system? And how do you sustain that for the long term to make sure that you have that long-term person or individual in that role? Mandy, do you want to take the first stab at that?
Yeah, I'd say I'm appreciative to H&I because they made it a job title, right? We invested in it. Now I have several different hats I wear because I think one of the things that employers struggle with in this type of role is justifying the ROI, right? The return on investment. When I talk to a kindergartner, I'm not going to see any results from that effort for 15 years, maybe. And that type of justification doesn't get much buy-in in corporate America, even though we know it's the right thing to do. And so being able to find real metrics to measure the reach, measure the activity, and to be able to actually see this outcome in the short term and the long term can be helpful. And in full transparency, I think we're still struggling with it to identify and get that full buy-in. But having, I have in my scope university relations, so that's more of my shorter term workforce development. And then I have my K through 12 outreach, which is more just about touches and events and impact as opposed to measurable jobs created and people to fill those roles. So yeah, truly having that point of contact that's dedicated to it, putting a job description behind it, building that relationship. And then the only thing, again, I've talked a little bit about that, but engaging in externships, I don't think we've talked about yet, and it's been really rewarding for us as a company. For those that don't know what teacher externships are, it's a summer-based experience where a teacher comes and works for me, works in an industry and gets real work experience to take back and teach from. What's been the benefit to us is it builds that direct connection with a passionate teacher who now not only has the face time with the students, has the passion to teach from experience, but they have the experience and they know me, they know my job, and I have that built already. So highly recommend externships, even if it doesn't fit the full model, maybe through the state, if there's a side way, or just to ask your local employers if they could provide a similar type of experience. I think most are willing to say yes, or you tell them to come talk to me, give them my experience and my contact info, and I will share how they could make it work. But just building that relationship, and I think shifting that knowledge to teachers is really helpful.
Michelle, key strategies that you've employed to help on the communication front.
Seth mentioned it earlier, the secret sauce is relationships. You have to make those, make time for those and continue to keep those up and find ways to relay those stories or metrics as best you can to those business partners, and just find every way to personalize an opportunity for a business partner to come into your school, whether that's, you want to start as a speaker or maybe host a tour, start with something small. A little 30-minute informational interview on Zoom is super easy to commit to. And then you kind of build up those opportunities for your students. And I'll tell you, it is a lot easier as an educator to put the top 5 or top 4 items here from the IBC in front of a student and say, see, this is why, it's not coming from mom and dad, and it's not coming from the teacher. This is coming from your future employer. And they need you to know this. So having opportunities to sit in on any sort of advisory groups. I know most schools have Perkins advisory for all of their CTE programming, things like that. Just ways to make it easy for business partners to continue to have those relationships and share, the goals that they have, and see if there's a way that there is a return on investment that you can provide for those business partners. And then, keep track of those stories. So Des Moines University was one of our long reach business partners when we started. We have high school students yet waiting for grad school, getting into their DO program. Well, we finally have it. We have students that made those long-term goals. So we're capitalizing on some really fun stories of how they started as an Apex student, working out of the commons area at DMU, and now they're students there. So just try to celebrate those long wins as well when you get them.
That's great. And Seth, quickly, any additional strategies that you would recommend folks employ to sustain these relationships?
I would just, I want what's best for my students. And if my students say that they want, they want success and, they want to be a welder, then I'm going to do whatever it takes. If they say they want to do something different, in my other classes, and, I'm going to do what it takes. So I think that from the business standpoint, just being flexible, understanding that, every now and again, if you do come to speak to a class, it doesn't always go just perfect. You might have one or two students that are going to frustrate you a little bit, but don't let that be a deterrent to not come back. It's very important for businesses to be in the classroom so they can kind of, I guess, if you want to call it, prep students for future employment. Yeah.
I
Very
would
good.
touch back on that, Joe, real quick.
Yeah.
Similarly, don't feel like you have to shield us or, put up a quality level of students too. We are fine seeing the raw students in the classroom. I've had some conversations with educators who are like, these are, I want to filter this a little bit, or let me prep them first. I'm like, just let me at them. I get it. I know where we're coming from, and I know what that audience is. So again, similar, I think the other side, Seth. Yeah, let's just get there.
Sure.
That's great. Mandy, Seth, Michelle, thank you so much for your insights today. I'm going to turn it back over to Kathy Leggett, who will introduce Joe Collins to bring us home. Kathy?
Thank you, Joe. And yes, just again, I can't say it enough, Mandy, Seth, Michelle, such great information. I mean, I'm glad we're recording this because I feel like we have multiple opportunities to share it with people who could not be with us today. So much value in this conversation. So thank you. And then let me go ahead and turn it right over to Joe Collins, Department of Education, to talk about some resources to consider. So welcome, Joe. Take it away.
Yeah, happy to be here. And it's great having a couple of educators on here. They've kind of stolen my thunder in a couple of areas here, but it's been great to hear kind of different contexts and kind of different programs. So I'll kind of reiterate some of the stuff they're talking about, but also provide some other kind of updates and some other things to keep in mind. So if you don't mind going to the next slide. I always recommend that audiences sign up for these two specific newsletters in case you're curious of kind of keep pace of what's happening in the world of education. The top one is specific to work-based learning. So if you want to kind of, again, kind of stay informed and connected on what's happening specific to work-based learning, I would recommend signing up for that newsletter at the link there. And then there's also the superintendent and education leader update that I would recommend signing up for. That's going to be a much broader perspective of education trends, updates, news, and so forth. You will often see employability skills talked about in kind of different capacities in both of those newsletters, but I would recommend signing up for both of those. There is no kind of like secret password you need to enter to get on those. Anybody can join, employers, educators, my mom, whoever. You can just sign up for those. So I strongly recommend signing up for those to, again, kind of stay informed and connected on things that are happening across the state. In case you were not aware, we're going through a bit of a rebranding process right now at the Iowa Department of Education, following Senate File 2411 that really reframed the definition of what we had referred to as work-based learning. Work-based learning had been kind of this umbrella term covering all of these experiences where students were learning about careers, exploring careers, doing internships, job shadows, kind of the whole gambit. We have now come up with a more simplified version of looking at that kind of process, and we're calling it career-connected learning. So as you may have seen in one of my prior links is the work-based learning newsletter, it actually goes to a CCL website, Career Connected Learning. And so instead of work-based learning being the umbrella term, we now have career-connected learning being that broad umbrella term of really two simplistic stages of career exploration, where the students are learning about work. That would be your job shadows, that would be your employability skills classes, that would be a lot of site tours, career fairs, all of that stuff. And then that's preparing the student to really be successful in that work-based learning component where they're learning the hands-on experience. So they're kind of working to actually get the skills and knowledge, skills, abilities, et cetera, to be successful in that world beyond. As many of the panelists have already talked about, particularly as it pertains to employability skills, workplace readiness, you can kind of talk till you're blue in the face in the classroom, but until they actually experience firsthand on the job site, and they maybe don't have a great feedback from an employer or from a customer, it doesn't really sink in, right? It doesn't actually connect in kind of that mind. So we need to make sure that we're doing both components, and ideally they are laddering and kind of feeding into each other. Especially if a student has a bad experience or they realize maybe I don't want to do welding. No offense, Seth, but I'm sure you had those. They then cycle back through and learn about another industry, another occupation. Then we kind of keep that conversation going. So, heaven forbid we don't lose that student, or we get them into something that they're not going to enjoy, they're not going to be successful at, and then everybody has a bad experience, employer, educator, community, etc. So if you want to go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about kind of some of those employability skills or professional skills. As many of our panelist members have already alluded to as well, there's a lot of terms that get kind of tossed around: professional skills, workplace readiness, employability skills. There's kind of different flavors to those types of skills and those types of classes, and how we kind of incorporate those into different components and learning modules and so forth. So I would say there's specifically two toolkits that I would recommend you check out in case you're curious. These are built more for an educator. So I know we've got kind of a diverse audience on the webinar here today. But if anybody is curious about kind of developing professional skills classes into their career and technical education shops, or their curriculum or their programs, that's what the CTE stands for. There is a toolkit for that. It's kind of broad. It goes through a lot of different things. And then there's a smaller professional skills workshop toolkit at the bottom of the screen down here that focuses maybe a little bit more about preparing that student to interview, to prepare their resume, kind of soft skills, kind of to prepare them to step into the job. But again, there's kind of different terminology that gets used across some of these different areas. In case you were not aware, there's actually an employability skills standards that are out with the state of Iowa. I don't have a link in the slide deck here, but if you just Google Iowa employability standards or 21st century skills Iowa, that will come up. And at a grade level, it kind of walks through employability skills standards that are meant to be incorporated into all courses, which again, I know Seth and Michelle were talking about. So regardless of the class, English class, math class, construction class, ideally these skills are being taught within the classroom in different capacities and at grade levels, appropriate grade levels. I will also quickly bring up House File 24, I think 2454, I think is, I just lost it for some reason, but I think it's 2454 that just went into law at the earlier this year. Also directs the Iowa Department of Education to really go back and review different standards in the education world. So employability skills is kind of looped into that bucket from what I understand, but it also has a review of graduation requirements and the statewide literacy plan. So you will see, again, kind of professional skills, employability skills. I think you will see a much greater emphasis as we continue to better understand the needs of business and industry and how we are preparing our students to really be successful in whatever that is. And I think somebody mentioned it being like a good human being, right? Let's teach them how to be good at communication, how to really engage with different types of populations, how to have disagreements, and that's fine. How to kind of roll with it and have that grit and that ambiguity, kind of dealing with ambiguity in different situations. So I wanted to bring that up because particularly those reviews and those analyses, you'll see an initial report of findings and recommendations roll out in December, but really the final report and final changes will not roll out until July. So lots of conversations on kind of the back end about graduation requirements, but also course standards and requirements and so forth. I would also just really quickly, before we go to the next slide, if you go to the link at that top of the page, there are toolkits for about every type of work-based learning experience. And we are going through the process of rebranding. So we appreciate your patience because you might see some old logos or old terminologies. But I would say there is a lot of really, really good stuff on that site. Again, most of it geared more for an educator in mind, kind of from that lens, but employers are going to get value from it as well. So next slide. So how do we teach these professional skills? Again, I don't really need to go through this as much because you were given specific examples from a couple of our educators across the state. But I just wanted to kind of quickly bring up again where you might see these kind of two diverging kind of views of using that term, where the top four kind of buckets on here are really preparing the student to sell themselves, communicate themselves, kind of what it means to kind of, research jobs, apply for jobs, land the job. Whereas like the bottom, maybe 6 are going to be more of what the business council was talking about of how do we kind of get people to work well together, to problem solve, to think critically. Communication is a huge issue that we hear about. So again, sometimes these are incorporated into a very specific course, like an employability skills or workplace readiness course. At the high school level, generally at the high school level, sometimes bleeding down into lower levels. But we also try to make sure that these are incorporated across all education levels and all courses so that students are learning gradually, again, how to be kind of an effective teammate, how to be a successful human being in whatever they plan to be when they grow up. So next slide. And I would say a critical component, this is maybe going to be an ask of my business and industry partners, and again, has already been alluded to or specifically thrown out there by the other panelists, but a critical component that is often missing is our business and industry representation. And I think there's often some confusion about how to get involved. I know a lot of our employers around the state maybe say, I don't want to take kids. I can't have kids on site. I don't want to employ them. Well, there are other ways to get involved. And again, I know I heard Michelle talk about joining like an advisory council for their program. So providing kind of that direct feedback. I would say from a kind of return on investment for you as a business and an industry member, think of it as cultivating your future workforce. You are directly involved in the conversation about what those students are learning and how you are building your future workforce. So are you on the curriculum advisory committees and trying to help them understand what knowledge, skills, abilities, or what technologies are at play at the local level within your community? So then that is incorporated into the classroom in different capacities. Are you helping to critique students? Maybe you're doing mock interviews or resume critiquing. There again, you're helping that student better understand what they need to be successful and to get hired on at your company. I come from a workforce development background myself, and I knew a lot of people had the skills necessary. They were just terrible at selling themselves. So trying to help them better understand so that you will grab them, because if they don't see their way through you, through in your community, a place for themselves in your community, they're gone. Heaven forbid we're going to continue to lose that talent from the state of Iowa. And then again, that provides you a direct opportunity to kind of walk the walk with them if you're actually employing them or you're providing kind of simulated work experience or opportunities on the job site other than just learning about it. It means a lot more to actually get that context, that real hands-on context in the job site. And then I also try to tell my employers, don't do this as a favor. Don't do it as charity. This is not meant to be charity. Work-based learning needs to be providing value to you, or don't do it. And a lot of that boils down to you are building that strategic relationship with that school, with that student, with that future workforce. So please do not just do it out of the goodness of your heart. I wish that was, fine and dandy, but it needs to be two-sided. There needs to be a value proposition back and forth. And I'll pause and that's about all I had. I tried to be quick, so we may have time for Q&A, but let me know if anybody has any other questions. Happy to kind of walk through.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. And thank you, everyone. We are really at our finishing point here. So again, loaded with great information. Thank you to those who joined us today. Please feel free. You will get the slides and a recording sent to you. And so please, I would encourage you to share this with others who couldn't join us. And a special thank you to Joe Murphy and the Iowa Business Council. Thanks for sharing what you learned. Thanks for the work that you put into doing this. It's incredibly valuable information. And Joe, Mandy, Seth, and Michelle, thank you again for your time and your sharing your great knowledge with us. And then I also just want to say a quick thank you to Abby for being our slide moving. I'm not saying that advancement person. She thank you so much for that and putting those together, and to everyone else who helped with this. So everybody have a great afternoon, and thanks again.